that's okay. We're so glad to see so many of you back today, joining us. Um, for those who are joining us for the first time today, welcome. My name is Valerie Young, and I serve as your Synod Executive and Stated Clerk in the Synod of South Atlantic. I'm so glad you're here. As I explained yesterday, the Synod has recently acknowledged that we are on a particular journey to embody, cultivate, and inspire impactful ministry and develop leaders. While this is a new direction for the Synod, that work has already begun with things like our first Wednesday sack lunch conversations, Sabbath by the pool for women in ministry, and these conversations about disaster preparedness and response with our PDA friends. At the close of our time together, I'll share a little bit more about those opportunities, but a few reminders for you now. Both yesterday and today's presentations are recorded or are being recorded and will be made available on the Synod's disaster assistance page on our website. I will get those videos and presentations uploaded as soon as possible, and we'll get an email out to each of you with the link, the direct link to that. We hope that you'll share the recordings with the members of your congregation and especially with your disaster response teams at your church and at your presbytery. Today, again, we ask you to hold your questions until the end, and because we're such a talkative group, please remain on mute throughout the conversation until the Q&A. Now, allow me to reintroduce our presenters for today's topic, Responding from the Heart, a guide to church and community recovery. Kathy Broyard comes from St. Augustine Presbytery and is the Executive Director and Emergency Management Specialist for the Florida Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Network. Ooh, ran out of breath there. Also known as FLACDAN. Kathy is part of the Florida VOAD leadership and has served on the PDA National Response Team since 2011. Mark McCain comes from Charleston Atlantic Presbytery and leads the South Carolina Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Team, is part of the South Carolina VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. Mark has served as on the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance National Response Team since 2017. David Woodburn comes to us from Savannah Presbytery, is part of the Georgia VOAD, and has served on the National PDA Response Team since 2016. Again, we're grateful you could be with us today, and now I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Valerie. We are so glad everyone is here. And for those of you who weren't here yesterday, welcome today. So we're going to be talking about response and recovery today, and responding from the heart, which I think is something very near and dear to us as the body of Christ in how we serve others. I'm going to ask David to open with a prayer.
Thank you, Kathy. Please join me in a prayer for recovery. For earth and sky, wind and water, we are thankful. For friends and family, for life and hope. May we be as one as we work together. May those who lost loved ones be comforted. May those who lost their homes find safe, peaceful shelter. May all survivors and those who serve be blessed with energy and wisdom for the tasks ahead. May we all remember that we are stronger together, and may we be bound together in hope and love. Amen.
Thank you, David. Mm-hmm. So everybody is familiar with pictures such as these when disaster strikes. And, disasters come in all forms. It could be a train derailment, with chemicals, flooding, whatever. Right now, because it's just a couple of days before hurricane season starts, we are specifically focusing on tropical weather systems, hurricanes, tropical storms, tornadoes, that kind of thing. So this presentation will be geared to that, but keep in mind that, disaster comes in all sorts of forms. So why do we do disaster response? Why do we care? I mean, if we're not affected, you know, great. Why bother with going out to help? But I think there's a theology of disaster response, which we'll talk a little bit about. And so I think it's in our beings, where we come from that and why we care. So when we think of disaster response, why do we care? What do we want to do because we care? Well, we want to respond to the needs of others in times of disaster. And then how do we do it? Well, we make a plan to respond. We don't just go willy-nilly. We want to have a plan of how to go about responding and caring in the most effective way possible for our families and friends and community. So the theology of disaster response, where is God in the midst of devastation? It's like, God, why did this happen? Why did you let this hurricane come and bring such destruction? When we have those questions, we often turn to our faith for that guidance. And then Jesus tells us to love and care for our neighbors. I mean, that's one of the most important things. The vulnerable, the widows, the orphans, those who are hungry. He tells us to feed them, thirsty, give them something to drink, those that are unhoused. And so that's, in a nutshell, kind of the theology of disaster response. We ask God questions, where are you, God? We turn to our faith, and Jesus tells us to go out and serve and love one another. So when we respond to disasters, we're putting our theology into action by doing, by caring, by being with people. So I wanted to back up to a little bit of what Mark talked about yesterday, just to kind of set the stage for our discussion today. And I'm going to ask Mark, since he did such a nice job yesterday, if he would just review the disaster management cycle. And if you'll notice, there's a little red disaster thing up at the top of the circles here. And my dog is barking. There must be a disaster imminent in the neighborhood. So Mark, would you share your wisdom?
Thank you, Kathy. As we talked about yesterday, the cycle of preparedness is the key to making a response adequate and appropriate. And now, during the response phase, we really are pretty much in prayer and hope and wandering and trying to gather information from those who are our governmental officials, Red Cross, who was standing by, and other organizations. And as we come into the recovery phase, that's when we need to have what we planned for and now be ready to implement it. As we come through the recovery phase, it causes us to say, okay, make notes. Remember what we did, what worked, what didn't work, how could we be better? And this leads us right into the mitigation. Now, some people call it mitigation and long-term recovery, but mitigation basically is lessons learned, identification of gaps that we need to overcome, and the beginning of recouping. And the cycle keeps going all the time, even today, and blue skies. Everybody's got beautiful weather today. It's sunny outside. Now is the time to be thinking about preparedness and preparation for the response and recovery. Okay, it's Kathy.
All right.
And as you see here, responding to an impacted community, all disasters are local, number one. And as we go through the ongoing preparedness during the blue skies, like we're having today, we start thinking about kind of immediate needs, which is called short term, and immediate, and then long term. Short term is that stability. Suppose you had some of those buildings in the lower left-hand corner, and they're still structurally sound. That is the time in which churches can help with such things as water, also blue tarps, the FEMA blue tarp programs, and beginning to protect what we have. And then we go into intermediate. Intermediate is when we start thinking about how can we shore up and safely rebuild a wing of a church, day school, cleaning up the campus. And then we think about long-term. If you remember yesterday, we gave a couple examples of good church services, but yet the long-term can last from months to years. And I have some friends who will retire literally after Katrina, and they continue to serve. So it's literally years in a large major event. So you need to prepare yourselves for each one of these phases. And what's the role and the responsibility of the session to guide the congregation through the short term, the immediate, and the long term, having those plans. And we went in great detail yesterday afternoon about some of these points. I hope this helps you understand the methodology. And this methodology is used across the board by all organizations, the Methodist, the Baptist, Muslim, Buddhist, all religions, but yet it also reflects what the government's going to be and other NGOs. So Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. I can't get my slide to advance. There we go. Okay. I wanted to pull up this slide. I don't know if anyone's seen it before, but when a disaster strikes, and this could be any disaster, I talked about different types of disasters, but even a disaster in your own life, a divorce, death of a loved one, something like that. There's this emotional roller coaster that we go through. So if you see stage one, the warning, if we have a warning, something like an earthquake, we might not, or sudden death, something like that. But there are usually fight or flight responses. And, we kind of make that decision, are we going to stay? Are we going to go? That kind of thing. So, heightened senses. Stage two is the impact. That disaster happens. Today we're talking about hurricanes. So, the hurricane hits, everybody's hunkered down. Soon as it passes and it's clear and safe to go outside, if any of you have experienced, a tropical system that's damaged your neighborhood, you go outside and there's shock. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened? There's fear. What are we going to do now? But relief too. It's like, oh, thank God we made it through this horrific storm. And so the emotional roller coaster, you start getting, a little bit higher. You're going up, and things are feeling, well, we can get through this. And then at the top of the peak, there's the heroic period or honeymoon period, and that is kind of like when everybody comes together. The example I like to use is, folks, they're without power. Everybody's got, their stuff in their freezer. So, hey, let's all throw a barbecue. Everybody brings their stuff. We got to cook it because it's going to spoil. So they bring out their gas grills and everybody kind of celebrates together. Hey, we made it through, and, it's a good time. But then they deal with insurance and FEMA and other things, and they can't get anybody to fix their roof. There's contractor fraud. And just the disillusionment. It's like, oh my gosh, we're never going to recover. And that can go on for a long, long time or a short time. But you can just kind of think of the things after a disaster that just makes you hit rock bottom, because nothing is happening. It's not happening fast enough. You just don't know how you're going to do it. And then we start working through that grief. There are good things that happen along the way. You start climbing back up, but then there are trigger events: the anniversary of the storm, the anniversary or birthday of the death of the loved one. And that can send, that emotional roller coaster line, back down. But, as we build, as we grow, as we heal, you know, things get a little better. We still have those trigger events, but maybe not quite as deep. And then finally, we come out to, you know, acceptance. We adjust to the new normal. And that's, you know, stage 6, when, you know, things are being rebuilt, the community's coming back to normal. And, you know, there's no real timeline for this. It can be different for everybody. It can go, you know, from months to years to decades. But just to kind of understand how we as humans maybe process disasters. So we're talking about churches and how we can help in the response and recovery. So what gifts can we bring? What do we have that we can bring to disaster response and recovery? Well, first of all, churches are really well established in their community. They are looked at, you know, the pillars of the community. They've been there forever, and they're trusted community partners. You know, people might not believe in what you believe in, but you know, they trust churches can be trusted community partners. Some churches have really great resources, lots of money, endowments, space, you know, a big fellowship hall, giant commercial kitchen. Other churches, maybe not as much. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe it's a very small elderly congregation, you know, very small building or something. But the point is that every church, every congregation can do something after a disaster. First of all, we can care for those who are impacted. We have caring in our nature, you know, that's that whole theology of disaster response. We care for our congregation, the individuals and families who have been impacted in our congregation, the elderly, the homebound, pastor and staff. They're the ones caring for everybody in the congregation. Who's caring for them? So we want to make sure that they are taken care of, and yourselves. That whole, you know, take care of yourself by putting on the oxygen mask in the airplane on you first before you help the person next to you. You got to take care of yourself before you can care for others. Beyond the walls of the church, we reach out to the community and care for individuals and families, you know, the elderly community, single parents, anybody that needs help. And this is stuff that sometimes we do throughout the year. One excellent way to help in the community is to provide respite, a respite center. I will get to that in just a second, but I want David to go into a little bit about what Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, our national disaster arm of the PCUSA, says about how we can help as individuals or as congregations after a disaster. So David, would you take the next couple of slides, please?
Sure, thank you. Disasters, as Kathy has mentioned, are local in nature, and we as PDA are a national organization. So it's inherent in this relationship that when a disaster happens in your community or another community, we as Presbyterians all want to do something. We want to help. And within the context of PDA, we have this graphic on our website, Give, Act, and Pray, or GAP. We're stepping into the gap. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about these aspects. I don't think as a congregation, you don't choose we're going to give or we're going to act or we're going to pray, but we just find the way that we can respond with these aspects. Giving, you see the One Great Hour of Sharing. This one special offering every year is our one and only budget source. We have lots of special gifts that come in after disasters primarily, but this is one offering. We share this with 2 other agencies in the church, but so every spring we can sort of establish a budget for our operations. So this is very, very important to our national team. If you do wish to make a gift in response to an event, we can receive designated gifts for a specific disaster event, or we can we're always happy to have gifts that we can use, financial gifts that we can use as needs arise through the year. One thing we try to be and encourage being organized with the way we give. I think our colleagues could share lots of stories about tractor trailer loads full of teddy bears showing up, and gifts of stuff, while useful in many cases, sometimes become a management problem on how to store them, how to distribute them, and so forth. And we've been taught that the most effective gift that you can make following a disaster is money. So just bear that in mind when you choose to give. ACT within PDA can range from very large major commitments, such as discerning to open a shelter for long-term recovery, to organizing a work trip with members of your congregation. But Kathy's going to talk about a lot of other local ways that are very simple to act. And I'm going to speak in just a minute about one way that you can get involved with acts of kindness. And praying is something that should, I guess, be a given and a constant as you give and as you act. We prayerfully consider what we can do in response. If we're going on a work trip, to pray for the safety of those that are working and for the recovery of those that you're there to help. And I think I'm probably preaching to the choir at that point. But Kathy, if you want to roll on. One thing that you may not be aware of, PDA partners with World Church Services in managing these kits. Now, like everything else in the disaster world, when we do provide material things, it's best to do them in an organized kind of way. And this website that you see on the screen, there is a specification listed for each of these cleanup buckets, hygiene kits, and school kits. These I think we picked out because they're specific and relevant to hurricanes, which is what we're here discussing. I just wanted to mention there's a few other kits on that website that you might want to consider for other contexts. So this is something that a congregation could make a project. These the cleanup buckets have an estimated cost of about $75 each, and the hygiene and school kits have estimated about $15. And these are something that you could keep within the community, but we do manage them in warehouses. We've got one in Arkansas, but and again, the distribution of these is in conjunction with World Church Service. So it would be really kind of cool to, you have gifts of the cost of the goods in it, and you have the act of putting these together. And then you can pray over them that they go into a household and be a blessing to those people. Kathy, back to you. Silenced.
Sorry, I muted myself. Okay. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that. So, with disaster response in mind, faith-based organizations already serve the community year-round. You know, they're feeding people, they're, opening their church space for meetings, all kinds of stuff. In disasters, faith-based, I believe it was Mark that mentioned, faith-based organizations are often among the earlier responders. You know, the folks, the Baptist folks come out with their chainsaws. United Methodists have their early response teams, but they go through all this training to make sure they know what they're doing, that it's safe, and then they're coordinated in when and where they go in. They don't just show up. But when you're thinking about disaster response, what do you do year round that could be a gift in disaster? So there we go. Some of the ways churches can be involved, maybe, larger churches. Could you be a Red Cross shelter for evacuees? Or a post-event shelter? Maybe, your building isn't as sturdy as a Red Cross shelter would need to be, but they need places to host families, when they open the schools back up. They need to get the children back into school, but there's still some families that don't have a place to go. Maybe your church could be a shelter like that. Do you have a parking lot that's, are you centrally located and have a large parking lot? Could you be a point of distribution? Could a semi get into your parking lot and distribute water, food, cleanup buckets? Can you feed people? Do you have a big kitchen? Do you feed people anyway throughout the year? Could you be a respite center? And I think something that every church can do, a very simple act, is to be a respite center. Consider this situation. You've just had a disaster, power is out in several communities, but somehow your church has power. Maybe you're on a different grid or whatever, and everybody around you doesn't have power. Invite people in to charge their cell phones. You know how huge that is in a disaster? I mean, even non-disaster, when our batteries run down, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to charge my phone. I can't be without my phone. Just grab a bunch of extension cords and power strips, plug them in, make some iced tea, let people come in, cool off from the heat, charge their cell phones. That is huge. And any church could do that. Any church. So simple. And I think it was David that mentioned the other day that he actually saw, we just had the tornadoes up in Tallahassee, and saw one of the marquees on the churches, charge your cell phones here. And it's just a really simple act, but a huge act. So the thing is that we can't do this alone. We must not do this alone. If you have a parking lot and flag down a semi off the highway, say, hey, come park in our parking lot, well, nobody's going to know it's there. You have to talk to those in your community that already coordinate the effort of disaster response. The partnerships and the infrastructure are already there. And so you need to get involved in that. So you connect and you network. You go and meet your local emergency manager. Maybe, when I said you could be a post-disaster shelter, you've got room for, maybe 10 families or something. You've got some classrooms that haven't been used in a long time. Go talk to your emergency manager about that. Say, hey, we've got this place. We'd like to help. You want to come look at it? Maybe it could be used. Valerie mentioned that the three presenters today are all active in VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, and COAD is Community Organizations Active in Disaster. In many, many communities, there are VOADs and COADs, and it's the faith-based groups, it's the Red Cross, it's Catholic Charities, it's Salvation Army, United Way, all sorts of organizations that come together. They meet maybe monthly, maybe quarterly, maybe once a year, but they talk about how they're going to coordinate locally in disaster. And that way we know that if the Salvation Army has their food trucks and the American Red Cross have their food trucks, and there's, a neighborhood where there's no food, the grocery store has been shut down or whatever, no power, when the Salvation Army and American Red Cross show up on the same corner and try to feed all these people, well, that's great for that corner, but the people 3 or 4 miles away who don't have access to food, it doesn't do them any good. So it's that pre-event, pre-storm coordination. Salvation Army says, hey, we're going to go this way. Red Cross says, we'll go here. You know, maybe there's a large church that could feed, you know, in location C. So you want to coordinate. So you're not duplicating efforts and you're not wasting valuable resources. So you want to get involved. And if you need help doing that, Mark or David or I, we could all point you in the right direction in your own state, in your own communities. We know our emergency managers, and we can get you connected, and we're happy to do that. So it's all about partnerships. It's working together for the greater good. So don't wait until a disaster to meet partners. You got to work together in blue skies. I've been in my position for 18 years with Flapdan and in disaster response and recovery, much longer than I'd care to share. But I know people. And this is not to brag, but you know, I meet people, I talk to people, you know, the emergency managers. So when I'm on a conference call and there's a need, or I find something, there's a need in our community, or a specific community in Florida, it's like, well, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know where the resources are, but I know who to call. And I'll pick up the phone and call whoever that person is. And if they don't know me, you know, 24, 48 hours after a disaster, they are not going to pick up the phone. But if it comes up and says, oh, Kathy from Flapdan, oh, hey, what can I do for you? So you got to have these conversations well in advance. You've got to coordinate. If you just go out and do stuff, that's not great. That's not great because, again, you're duplicating resources in many cases. Sometimes it creates more harm than good. And so you want to coordinate with your local disaster recovery partners. So once that response is over, you know, things are getting tarped and you know, people are fed and things start to, you know, settle down. The emergency crews are not, you know, as prominent. We start transitioning into long-term recovery. And the term long-term recovery is because it takes a long time, but it forms in response to the unmet needs in a community to assist those people who maybe didn't have enough money in insurance or, you know, FEMA grants or whatever to rebuild, and they can't get back into their house without help. It's community driven. Long-term recovery is community driven. It's the organization of a lot of community resources, organization of volunteer groups, donations, all kinds of stuff. And it's not resource driven. If we have a lumber company that has, you know, 20,000 truckloads of shingles, and hey, we're going to give shingles to every person in this community, well, that may not be what those people need. You know, many people need windows or new floors or whatever. And so that long-term recovery is needs driven. And then it's case managed. People apply for help. They work with a case manager to learn of their needs, learn what resources they can bring to the table. You know, do they have, you know, some savings or some relatives that can help? They get a construction estimate through the long-term recovery community. And it's going to take this much to rebuild their house. Well, where do we get this much? You know, we've got donations of you know, the shingles, the windows, the doors. We've got volunteer groups that can come in and in many cases help to rebuild these houses. So when a long-term recovery group forms in a community, there are several committees. And this is important because your church might fit into one of these committees. You may have somebody in your church that has done this kind of stuff all their life, a retired construction person. You've got the construction management section that I talked about disaster case management already. Construction management. Who goes out to look at these houses? Write down a supply list. How's it going to be rebuilt? Volunteer management. Who's going to coordinate the volunteers to come in to do that with the construction supplies that we need? Communications, how do we get the word out that we're helping people in the community, that they can come and apply for assistance? How do we, communicate that we need monetary donations and not truckloads of clothes, because they don't need your fur coat from Massachusetts or wherever you are. That social media, that, public service announcements, donations management. So what are we going to do with all those fur coats that came? Emotional and spiritual care. So that's something that churches may be able to slide right into. Stephen ministers, other kinds of support that churches give on a year-round basis. How can that be used in disaster? Can somebody plug in, somebody from your church, go attend these long-term recovery meetings? Financial controls and reporting. Do you have a retired accountant in your congregation? They could be a treasurer for the organization. Wouldn't take up that much time. So there are ways to plug in and to coordinate. So long-term recovery comes together. It's kind of like a potluck supper. So you need all these components, right? The case management, the construction, volunteers, financial, the whole thing. When we have a potluck supper, most of the time we don't say, okay, we need you and you and you to bring the protein. We need you and you to bring the salad. Okay, Mary and Sue, you're going to bring the desserts. John, you're going to bring the drinks. No, it's just everybody brings the stuff, right? And they usually bring their specialty. They're not going to start a new recipe and, test it on everybody. Well, maybe some people would, but usually, if your green bean casserole is a hit all the time, you're going to bring that green bean casserole. So with recovery and the different organizations in a community, it's just like a potluck supper. All these different organizations, you saw some logos a few slides back, Catholic Charities, United Methodist, Salvation Army, Red Cross, the stuff that they do year round, no disaster. Catholic Charities does case management every day of the year. People who need bus tickets, people who can't pay their light bill, that kind of thing. You've got your folks, Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together. They do construction year round. They bring their gift to the table, that specialty. So everybody brings their special piece of what they do, their niche, to that recovery table. And then you've got the makings for a complete recovery, just as you would a potluck supper. So again, what gifts can we bring? How do we help our communities heal? We can, like I said, join a long-term recovery group. Maybe you've got a great organizer in your congregation. Do you have an empty a little classroom or something in your church? Provide office space for the executive director of the long-term recovery. We have a church here in Gainesville, where I'm based, that had an old storage room. It had a window, thankfully, but they cleaned that out. And that is Flapdan's office space. They provide it free of charge. They have been doing that for years now. We don't pay anything. We get to use that space, and that is their way, one of the ways that they help the recovery efforts and disaster, the disaster realm. So, something a little like that, unused spaces. Maybe you've got some connections to local resources. I mentioned the emotional spiritual care, Stephen ministers, that kind of thing. So see how you can plug in. Maybe you can provide hospitality. You might not be able to host volunteers, every week, but maybe you could feed them. Do you have a Wednesday night dinner that you do once a month or once a week or something? Invite the local volunteer team that's coming to work, whoever they are, the Methodists, the Baptists, anybody. Invite them to your covered dish dinner. get to know them, thank them for what they're doing in your community. That's an easy thing to do if you know when they're coming and can talk with them to coordinate. Hey, yeah, come to our church on Wednesday night. So you get involved with that long-term recovery and say, hey, we can't sit on the committee, but know that we can feed your volunteers. We have a covered dish dinner twice a month. Here's the dates. Please put them in touch with us and we'll be happy to feed them for that one night. That's huge. That's huge. And volunteer work teams, they're vetted. They're affiliated, trained, sponsored, supported, invited, and accountable. So, they're good people. They're good people. So in all this presentation sums it up that every church can do something. It might be, clean up after a storm, like, some of these pictures, getting a team out for one day. It could be feeding people that you do year round. It could be hosting. It could be providing that glass of iced tea and a place to charge a cell phone. The flood buckets, the cleanup kits. We had several churches pull together and build those kits, and we've used them. They went out during Hurricanes Ian and Idalia. So there's something that every church can do. And I think it boils down to that, disaster response. We do disaster response because we hear a call from God to serve the survivor. We want to help. We care. And we can make a huge impact for local families when we respond. This is an older picture, but a family who lived in a mobile home that was devastated by a hurricane, and through the long-term recovery group in their community, they were able to get a brand new mobile home through fundraising and other means that the recovery committee pulled together. And so just, you can make a huge difference. And it's all about partnerships. We can't do this alone. We are better together, and partnership is the key to response and recovery. So we've got some time for questions, comments, concerns. We are so happy to answer any questions you may have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. And I think Valerie will open it up for some questions. Thank you all for listening to the presentation, and I hope that left you a little inspired to maybe see how your church could get involved in recovery, whether it's your own recovery of your church building. And please do reach out to us if you have needs in your church, and we can help guide that process. So thanks.
Are there any questions? Wow. Yes. I said before, quiet group.
It is a quiet group. Well, let me add just a couple of things, a couple of real neat success stories. One, I'm going to brag a little bit on John Raymer here in one of the yellow shirts there, with our flood cleanup kits, the flood buckets. We were able to bring actually a few pallets in from Church World Service, as David was talking about, that they come on these pallets of 30 buckets a pallet or something like that. John works for Camp Montgomery, the Camp and Conference Center here in North Central Florida, St. Augustine Presbytery. And he worked with his staff to accept those buckets. So the semi-truck went to their camp to deliver the buckets. You need a forklift to get them off the we call it semi-truck. They have a tractor, but they didn't have a forklift. But Flapdan had some funds that were donated for hurricane response and recovery, and we were able to buy a forklift attachment for Camp Montgomery. They are now a bucket distribution center, all thanks to John and his willingness to talk to his director and open some space there at the camp. And I've got pictures of John riding around on that John Deere with the forks and unloading pallets of buckets, and then some of our other members, picked buckets up and brought them to, different distribution points. So, just a great story there.
Kathy, you
And
have a question in the chat.
yeah,
Comes from John Booth.
John, yes.
We in Florida are who are especially victims through homeowners and auto insurance premiums to contractor fraud. Has there been any effort among those in the group to look further into means to resolve these problems? Is anyone familiar with such an effort? We had some conversation about that yesterday, but I'll let you respond.
Yeah, a little bit. There are some organizations that really come down on contractor fraud, and you can get online to look up those organizations. You always want to get multiple estimates. You never want to give money, before the, like, hey, I'll give me $10,000. I'll come back next week and fix your roof. No. Better Business Bureau. I've got some links that I can send to Valerie. She could post them on the website, maybe. I don't have them handy right now that I could put in the chat, but we could certainly do that. But yeah, contractor fraud, especially, to churches. I know Faith Presbyterian in Cape Coral after Hurricane Ian was very concerned about contractor fraud. They had a lot of issues with that. Yeah, we are trying to get word out. I don't know that the Presbyterian Church is doing anything specifically, like has a specific program for that. I don't believe they do, but certainly.
Kathy, are those links on Flapdan has its own website, right?
Yes.
You want to put the link to that in the chat?
Oh,
and then,
I could certainly do that. Those contractor fraud links are not on the Flapdan website.
That's fine, but go ahead and put that on there. And if you want to share those other links with me, I'll make sure they make it on this.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks.
Sure.
Kathy, Mark here.
Yes, go ahead.
One thing that everybody should think about is the Attorney General's office of each state will assign somebody to the State Emergency Operations Center for simply this purpose alone. And they will do a lot of follow-up. So once again, back to what Kathy was talking about, relationships, develop a relationship with your county official. And it's not the first time they'll see this. They see it quite often when there's a presidential disaster. And also something else is we had a storm up here in South Carolina a couple of months ago, in which 2 to 3 inch hailstorm that went through a community. And in turn, we had a lot of vehicles that were damaged. And a lot of them were indigent families who had the vehicles totally damaged. Small Business Administration, SBA, when they will come in after a disaster and they will provide assistance because they consider that personal property. And they will be glad to assist. And that's a big gap that can be covered in that area. But fraud, like Kathy said, that's a big issue and it's one that's ongoing.
Thanks, Mark. Other questions?
Kathy,
Yes.
I was listening to what do you call it? A neighborhood talk with my congresswoman the other night, and Congress is actually trying to crack down on this fraud and people after. So you may want to contact your local congressperson. She has devoted people in the area that I live in to crack down on this and track these people down, and is trying to help prevent it and do things about it. I was really surprised that a Congress lady was doing it, but she's committed people to help stop some of this, and especially people taking advantage of senior citizens.
Thank you, John. Other questions, comments? One thing I will mention, David talked about cash donations, like designated giving to Presbyterian disaster assistance. A lot of times when people donate, they want to know where their money goes. And it was after Hurricanes Irma in 2017 and Hurricane Michael in 2018. So every presbytery in Florida was greatly impacted those 2 years, all 6 presbyteries. Working with long-term recovery groups and the response and recovery, PDA provides special projects grants that can help long-term recovery groups stand up, hire staff, get building materials, that kind of thing. Well, they also do church damage grants for churches that have been damaged in disaster. But after those 2 years, the money that came back from PDA into Florida, either to long-term recovery groups, churches, or whatever, was over $1.5 million for those 2 storms. And that is your money from the pews going up to PDA. And it comes right back into our local communities to, maybe pay the salary of a case manager or something, or, buy shingles or replace appliances. $1.5 million of PDA, of your contributions to PDA came right back to Florida. So it makes a huge difference. And so thank you for supporting PDA.
And Kathy, also congregations need to think about 2 other options that are available. When PDA comes into a community after being invited by the general presbyter or the leader of the presbytery, one of the funding streams we bring with us is a $5,000 immediate assistance grant. We talked about blue tarps. You need some lumber real quick to shore up the building or something like that. That grants are it's not going through it's a 1-pager. What do you need? When do you need it? What are you going to do with it? That's the end of it. The second grant is a $7,500 grant. And I encourage, we just did one up here in South Carolina, $7,500 grant for that same community got hit by the hailstorm. And they're using it for outreach. So basically the presbytery can take and designate the churches that want to step up and do it. And they gave credit card, given amount, cash cards to impacted families to help them. And also to go in, and we had a non-governmental organization, Pharmacy. They helped them to come up and get their system back up. Even though it's not serving the Presbyterian Church itself, it's serving the community under the auspices of the Presbyterian Church. So your creativity is, it's at your hand, and PDA is more than happy to help. And that's done through Reverend Jim Kirk. And all 3 of us can help you connect with him, or the Presbytery execs should also be able to.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I would like to say a word. Kathy talked a good bit about long-term recovery groups and VOADs and COADs. And in our congregation, in Dublin, we're all the way up in the northwest corner of the Savannah Presbytery. So we're 125 miles from the coast. And our presbytery has experienced a good number of storms, but often our community, our local communities, is away from it. We have, as a congregation community that's never directly experienced this kind of a devastating storm, it's very hard to get people on board with the preparedness team if you haven't lived through a disaster. And likewise, we were part of an effort to get a COAD going in the county, and we had mostly Red Cross, Salvation Army, and the EMA participating, and it never kind of went anywhere. And what I've seen through my work here is that once you've been through a long-term recovery, a lot of times that will transition on the left side of the circle of the cycle, transition into a COAD that's highly motivated because you have experienced it before and you appreciate the need to be organized when the next storm comes around. I guess most of you in the audience have lived through multiple disasters, either as a direct impact or as a responder. But I guess I would encourage you to use those past experiences of coming together and organizing in the community to roll it into your COAD.
Thanks, David.
I'd like to get a point of clarification, if I may. Does PTA have to have an invitation from Presbytery to come into a particular area and provide assistance?
Yes. That's the fast answer.
From mid-councils, I think it's
Yes.
acceptable for the Synod to extend an invitation.
It would need to come, the Synod would never extend an invitation on behalf of a presbytery. That has to come from your presbytery directly.
And one thing to add on to that is the fact that we all maintain, there's about 70 of us across the nation. We all maintain awareness of what's going on in our areas, and we'll pass that information forward. And Jim Kirk and his personnel often reach out. As soon as we know something, he knows about it. And in turn, where you say, what is
Jim
there?
often knows things before most of us know things.
Mhm.
And my response about the Synod is to be clear, if I am not above contacting the presbytery leadership and saying, hey, you should invite PDA in, but PDA won't respond to my invitation. They will only respond to a presbytery's invitation, in my experience. So. Okay, well, we're just about done, and Kathy and Mark promised to give me 2 minutes of your time. If you don't mind, I would like to take an opportunity, well, first of all, to thank you all for joining us here, but I also want to take an opportunity to share with you a couple of other things that the Synod is doing and invite you to become a part of that. I will say in the outset, these do not involve work. Just something, just ways that you can connect, ways that you can be in process of building relationships across the Synod. I want to share the screen with you. You may have heard me if you've been to your presbytery meeting lately. You may have heard me talk about the first Wednesday SAC lunches. This is a monthly opportunity to join, learn, and share your experience, resources, and practice on a particular topic each month, a chance to cultivate authentic community within and across your presbytery. And it is not a workshop. It's not a monthly workshop. It's not a monthly advertisement or opportunity to promote any one thing. The only experts in the room in these are the people that show up for the conversation. I know a few of you have been there. I know Alan was on one of them, and I can't see everyone else's faces, but we've gotten some good feedback that, you know, they've never been involved in a Synod-wide conversation before, and it's helping to build some relationships and helping to share resources across the Synod. So I'm super excited about that. I want to also share, I'm going to unshare that screen and share one more thing with you, if I may, that's coming up quickly. And we are anxious for more registrations for the Sabbath by the Pool. This is particularly for women in vocational ministry. It is a continuing education event. We have an author. We have Reverend C.C. Armstrong, who is currently standing for co-moderator of the General Assembly, is going to facilitate one of our conversations. There will be yoga. There will be a spiritual director present and meeting with women, and just really good opportunities to connect. I recommend this to you if you have or know of a woman in vocational ministry. I hope you will invite her to register for this continuing education event. Yes, all of these things literally take place by the pool. And there'll be time to splash around in the pool as well. So thank you again for being with us today and for allowing me that just little bit of opportunity to share other things that are happening within the Synod. Thank you, Kathy, Mark, and David, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yes,
Thank
thank you so much. And remember that these have been recorded yesterday and today and will be available on the Synod's disaster page in a few days. So you could download them, and please do share them with your congregation, your presbytery. Yeah, just reach out to us if you need us. I'm going to quickly put up our contact information just so you have that. And you might want to take a screenshot of it. There we go. If you need to get a hold of us, we are happy to help. And so thankful to have you all here with us today.
And I think Mark should pray us out.
All right. And then Mark and David and Valerie, could you hang on after we're done and everybody leaves?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, as we prepare our hearts to serve others during the worst of times, let us always know that you're our guiding light. You provide us the necessary wisdom. You provide us with the faith. And you provide us with hope to help make another day bright for someone who needs a little bit of kindness as they recover from devastation. That those impacted by the tornadoes in the Midwest continue to know that we're here to help, and let them always know that the Lord is watching over them and he has them in the palms of his hands. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, everyone.